Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mariana, but you can call me Mari, and today we will be talking about all the books I read this year, part 2. So, without further ado, let's continue talking about all the other books I read this year. I didn't realize that last video I had only talked about a few books, and there are so many more. That's why I decided retroactively to make this a 3-part little series where I catch you up on all the books I've read. And with this in mind, I ended the last video talking about Daughter of No Worlds, and then I stopped it. I stopped the video. I was like, I'm too tired to continue. Let's pick it up another time. And so the next book I read from that list of books is Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano, as I would say. In this novel, we follow a group of characters. It's very much like a slice of life fiction novel. For some reason, I thought this novel was going to be about unhinged women. And even though we did see a little bit of that unhinged side on some of the female characters, I would say this is mostly about a very lonely man. And kind of like a little bit passive, very, very passive, to be honest. And it reminded me a lot of Stoner, of this sort of character who doesn't know what he wants really and just follows along, and kind of things happen to him, but it's not that he's actually being a participant in his own life. And we get to see him fall in love with one of the sisters in this big family that has many issues of their own. And then we follow the sisters, we follow him as, things happen, some drama occurs, and we do get to see a side of these sisters and how these women are portrayed that is quite interesting. I would say the character exploration in this novel was what I found the most appealing. I will say most of the characters are very unlikable, so if that's something that will put you off from reading any sort of novel, this is not for you. But if you do like character exploration, if you like unlikable characters, if you like kind of difficult discussions framed within this sort of slice of life, just following these characters with no plot really on sight, I would say this novel is worth reading if you like that sort of thing. I found it to be kind of like a beautiful retelling of Little Women, because again, we get these 4 sisters. It is very much focused around family dynamics, and even though it dragged a little bit at times because again, there wasn't really a plot, it was still worth reading for me, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I went on to read a few thrillers, as I was also reading some books for school. So the next few books will just be thrillers or just, kind of miscellaneous novels here and there. And the next one was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. I've actually talked about this novel, I think, before in my channel. I really, really enjoyed it the first time I read it. I gave it 5 stars because it was this big, shocking, very twisty thriller that I had read for the first time. And though I still find it very fascinating and I really do enjoy the story as a whole, I think it is very well constructed as a thriller. I do think it is very, very gratuitous and quite horrifying, to be honest. So if you don't have the stomach to read these sort of thrillers, I wouldn't recommend it. It does focus a lot around violence against women, and it has some very, very gnarly plot points. Again, always focused around the abuse and the harm against the women in the plot. We do follow kind of like a small town thriller where the main woman of this novel is trying to find out what happened to some girls that have disappeared, and her life gets intertwined within these mysteries, and she kind of has to find out. And it's not really a detective novel, more so that we follow just a normal person trying to figure out what is wrong with the people in the city. So as a reader, it puts you in a position where you are also trying to find out what happens within the mind of this female protagonist. And we do follow, again, Claire, who's the main character. Her elder sister, Julia, went missing 1 year, and then more women started disappearing, and she kind of wants to find out why, because it immediately affects her life and those around her. And I gave it 4 stars. I had given it 5 stars the first time I read it. This reread, I ended up giving it 4 stars. So the next novel I read was for university, and it is Troilus and Crusade by Geoffrey Chaucer. You might have heard of him, as he is the famous author that wrote the Canterbury Tales, and you might have read it for high school, if not for college. If you do anything related to English literature, he's very important. And I had never heard of his other works before, so I ended up taking this course just about Troilus and Crusade. And I will say I don't remember a lot. I know that we had many different discussions about the different plot points. I know it is kind of like a retelling of Il Filostrato by Giovanni Boccaccio. A lot of authors would kind of plagiarize each other. This was very normal. Plagiarism wasn't a thing. So they would kind of rewrite each other's works and criticize it and kind of make fun of it. And in a very Chaucian way, we do get this here. It is in medieval English, so Middle English, written with that sort of dialogue, and it is an epic poem. So keep that in mind. Not the easiest text to read. After I read Troilus and Crusade, I read one of my favorite books this year. I read My Darling Dreadful Thing by Johanna Van Veer. This novel is very much a gothic tale, a gothic horror novel about a girl who is being haunted or maybe even possessed. Her aunt uses her magical abilities, or this connection that she has to this spirit, to manipulate costumers and get money. And then from there, we learn that, this might be real, may not be real, and many things develop from there.
So here, I forgot a few things. I just forgot to mention the main character's name, Ruse. Her aunt is actually her mama. She calls her mama, which is like the mother figure in this novel, again, exploiting her abilities in order to attract costumers. And then we also get Agnes, who's a wealthy widow who comes to visit them. And then Agnes wants to take Ruth away from Mama. So we get this also kind of queer dynamic between the two characters. Very interesting novel. Highly recommend.
This novel, though, I would say you could potentially consider to have purple prose. I thought the writing was beautiful. I thought it was very descriptive, but in the richest of ways. We got this sort of, again, very creepy, gothic setting. The exploration of female friendship and the development of these two characters really reminded me of other horror stories like The Haunting of Bly Manor, for example, one of my favorite shows of all time. I would say it had that feminine energy to it. I cannot describe why exactly.
It's because it's gay.
Two bros chilling in the hot tub, 5 feet apart because they're not gay.
Very interesting dynamics there. Again, one of my favorite novels of the year. So I will talk a little bit more about it during my favorites wrap up. Then I read another thriller, Local Woman Missing, Mary Kubica. I cannot remember anything about this novel. Nothing. I tried to recall what it was about. Absolutely nothing. And honestly, that is not a good thing. When it comes to a thriller, I kind of want to remember at least a little bit of the plot. And then I went to my Goodreads review, and all I wrote was I didn't care about any of the characters. They all sounded like annoying rich white ladies in my head. So I guess that's my review for this novel, and I gave it 2 stars. Then I read The Life We Bury by Alan Eskens, and this was a much better thriller, I would say, than the last one. It's about Joe, a university student who is writing a biography and for one of his courses, and he decides to interview a veteran of the Vietnam War who is also a convicted killer. And of course, being a thriller, we don't really find out what actually happened. And as he is telling his own story, so the killer's story, we also get to find out a little bit about Joe, the main character's home life. He lives with his autistic brother and an alcoholic abusive mother. The whole story kind of delves with these two storylines. It is very well written in terms of character development and the way that we explore both his family life and also the life of this killer, how it goes kind of in parallel to each other, and he learns things that he wouldn't have learned otherwise. And I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. I will say some of the plot points were a bit unbelievable, but that's just kind of what happens with a lot of thrillers, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then I read the only, I would say, self-help novel that has actually made any sense to me. I ended up reading Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents: How to Heal from Distant, Rejecting, or Self-Involved Parent. This kind of self-help psychology book written by Lindsay C. Gibson is pretty informative, I would say. If you can identify with any of the descriptions of the title, I would highly recommend anybody to read it. I think it gives good strategies to try to figure out whether you did have that sort of childhood, how to deal with it, what are some ways that you can develop kind of traumas or experiences through your life that will be detrimental to the future, to your future self, and how to prevent yourself from falling into these rabbit holes of, maybe patterns of behavior that you wouldn't want. I would say it is worth a read. I didn't rate it because I tend not to give ratings to nonfiction novels. So then I read the adaptation of one of the novels I already mentioned that I read for uni, and this was also part of this course, Troilus and Cressida, but this time it's Troilus and Cressida by William Shakespeare. If you ask any of my friends from university, they will tell you that I don't really like Shakespeare that much. Now, over time, I've learned to appreciate the craft. I've learned to appreciate why Shakespeare is so important for English literature as a whole. But reading it, it's fine. I would say this novel is very, 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 very heavily inspired by the Greek War. And that is it. The romance aspects that you could see in Chaucer's version of this text is almost non-existent here. We do get a lot of political intrigue, which again, Shakespeare is well known for. This is more of a historical play rather than one of his tragedies or comedies.
Technically, this is considered a problem play because it mixes history, comedy, and tragedy together within this play. But as I was reading it, I considered it to be more historical than anything else. But of course, because it is based on another story, then it mixes that aspect of historical versus fiction, and then you get problem play.
One of the less well-known Shakespeare texts, if you are a Shakespeare connoisseur, of course, you can always say what you think about this one down in the comments. And I gave it, I think, 3 stars, but it doesn't really matter because, again, I read it for school, so don't really want to give too many ratings for novels that I'm purposely trying to read for a course. Then I read the most famous vampire novel of this year, Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. And this was a sapphic romance vampire horror novel. And though I will say I have a lot of thoughts about it, I really liked the representation of hunger within vampirism. I liked that we follow this one woman throughout her entire vampire life. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years. I ended up kind of getting very bored by the modern aspect of the novel because we do flip back and forth between the older times and then the modern era, and we begin the novel almost in medieval times and then end up in the 2000s. So it's interesting to see how V.E. Schwab managed to create this story throughout the different eras of history. And unfortunately, I will say, I don't know if that was done particularly well. I think there were clear ideas of where the novel needed to go, and we kind of jumped from one plot point to the other without connecting it as well as I would have liked. There is a YouTube video by Plant-Based Bride where she talks a lot about her perspectives on the queerness of the novel, because though it is a sapphic vampire novel, it does deal a lot with violence against women perpetrated by other women. So it's just a lot of constant stalking and fear, and it's just not the nicest novel to read. I kind of was expecting a little bit more of the unhinged perspective of a vampire woman, you know, and the seductiveness of her persona being targeted against bad men, against, I don't know, anyone else, but it was always these innocent, unoffensive women that were getting in this novel. So I don't know. It wasn't necessarily my favorite. I did enjoy the writing style for most parts of it. I did get bored at some parts of the novel, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. And again, hunger as a main motif is one of my favorite things. I loved the description of that constant hunger. And you know what? I am constantly hungry. So I am a vampire. What can I say? You know, that is my big secret. Now you know. Now you know. And now I will mention the last 2 novels that I want to include in this part 2 of my yearly wrap-up, I guess, or all the books I read this year. And the next one is really, really exciting because it is one of my favorite novels of all time. And this is Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez, or Nuestra Parte de Noche by Mariana Enriquez. I read it in Spanish first a couple years ago, so it is on my channel as well, and it is one of my favorite novels of all time. So you might have heard me talk about this before. But I ended up reading this novel in preparation for my master thesis. I am not going to use it anymore, which kind of makes me a little bit sad, but at the end of the day, I got to read it again. So it's a win for me. And I did the whole analysis on the novel. I could talk about this for days, and I think I might do just a specific video about this novel because, again, it is one of my favorites of all time. In this novel, we follow Juan and his son Gaspar as they travel around Argentina during the dictatorship and post-dictatorship, and we learn a little bit about the context of Argentina at that time, but most of all, we learn about this cult that they are trying to kind of run away from, called the Order. The Order's whole purpose is to try to gather darkness, which is this demon entity that seeks power. They want to harness this power to achieve immortality. So, very, very cool novel. It is one epic story. Gothic horror, Latin American magical realism, but pure also fantasy, darkness, gnarly descriptions of abject bodies. And it's just, it's so good. It's so, so good. So, of course, 5 stars. All round, one of the best novels of all time. I love this. Read it, read it, read it. Then, also one of my favorite authors of all time, Mariana Enriquez. I bow down to the queen. Anyways, then I read Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez, and very much complete opposite to Our Share of Night. This is a romance novel where we follow Samantha, who walks into this veterinary clinic to give help to a cat that she wants to rescue. And upon entering, she meets Xavier, who is this, again, tall, dark, handsome man, because of course that is the that is the typical character trope that we'll see in these romance novels. But to be fair, I will say this is a very well done character. Xavier is a good, male protagonist that we see as this, again, very broody man who just kind of ends up finding softness within his relationship or his interactions with Samantha. After they meet, they have just one night together, and then Samantha has to move away. So they have to start kind of like a long distance relationship. I really enjoyed this romance novel as a whole. My main issue with it is that a lot of the compromises that the couple made were one-sided. And it felt really very much about finding a balance. Like, that was the whole point of this novel, like them talking about this long distance situation and how to manage each other's expectations and the effort that they were going to put into this relationship, whether it would work or not. And at the end of the novel, I felt like one of the characters had done almost everything for the other, and it just felt like if you want to be in this sort of like compromising relationship where you have to give up so much of yourself, then it feels very, again, one-sided. Though I really enjoyed the banter, the conversations that these two characters had, I will say it is one of the better romance novels that I read this year, but it still didn't quite scratch that itch that I have when it comes to communication and just healthy dynamics. This one disappointed me just a little bit, again, with the resolution at the very end, and these characters coming to terms with this situation to then end up being completely unbalanced, and one of them kind of sacrificing everything to be with this other person. I don't want to spoil much more than that. There was a little bit of imbalance when it came to the relationship, but overall, I did enjoy it. It was a very good written romance. Abby Jimenez does know what she's doing. Alongside Emily Henry, she's also one of the authors that I will try to read more novels from. Anything she puts out, I would want to read because she does have a really good writing style. So overall, I would say it was good. I give it 3 stars, so just middle of the road. Not the worst book in the world, but also not the best. Just good. So that is it for today and all the books I'll be talking about now. And then, of course, part 3 will be coming hopefully next week. And then I'm off for Christmas season, for the Christmas holidays. So I'll probably see you next year, and with my favorite books and my worst books of the year. And I hope you're doing well. I hope you're drinking enough water. I'll see you soon with part 3. Bye-bye.